Let's start with the less cray and work our way up. The Willowbrook hepatitis experiments. Imagine it's the 1950s in Staten Island, New York. The Willowbrook State School, a facility for children with intellectual disabilities, is overcrowded and understaffed. So naturally, some scientist decides, you know what this place needs? A hepatitis study. Enter Dr. Saul Krugman, who looked at these vulnerable children and thought, perfect test subjects. Because nothing says medical progress quite like experimenting on kids who can't say no, right? Krugman and his team deliberately infected healthy children with hepatitis. Their justification? Well, hepatitis was already running rampant in the facility due to poor sanitation. So, in their twisted logic, they figured, hey, they're probably going to get it anyway, so we might as well be the ones to give it to them. Kind of like setting someone's house on fire because you think it might burn down someday anyway. They split the kids into two groups. One got a vaccine they were testing, the other got hepatitis. This went on for 14 years. And the parents? Many were coerced into giving consent, told it was the only way their children could be admitted to the overcrowded facility. The study only came to light in the 1970s when a young doctor named William Bronston blew the whistle. Suddenly, everyone was shocked to discover that maybe, just maybe, intentionally infecting disabled children with hepatitis wasn't the most ethical thing to do. The fallout? Well, it led to major reforms in how we protect human subjects in medical research. It also gave us the term informed consent, which is basically medical speak for, are you sure you want us to do this to you? But perhaps the most lasting legacy of Willowbrook is that it serves as a constant reminder to medical researchers everywhere. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. The Tuskegee syphilis study, picture this, it's 1932, the Great Depression is in full swing, and some genius at the US Public Health Service decides, you know what would be a great idea? Let's trick a bunch of poor African-American men into thinking we're giving them free healthcare, but actually just watch as their syphilis gets worse. Because apparently, that's what passed for a good time back then. So these researchers round up 600 men in rural Alabama, telling them they're being treated for bad blood. Of these men, 399 had syphilis, while the rest were the control group, or as I like to think of them, the lucky ones. Now here's where it gets really wild. In the mid-1940s, penicillin becomes widely available as a cure for syphilis. You'd think this would be the moment our researchers would say, oops, our bad, here's some antibiotics, fellas. But no, they doubled down harder than a blackjack player with a gambling addiction. They actually prevented these men from getting treatment elsewhere. For 40 years, they watched as these men went blind, lost their mind, and kicked the bucket, all while sitting on a cure. It's like having the answer key to a test, but insisting on failing anyway. The study only ended in 1972 when a whistleblower decided that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't cool. Well, besides the obvious trail of misery and death, it left us with a valuable lesson. Maybe don't be cartoonishly evil in the name of science. The MK-Ultra experiments. It's the 1950s. The Cold War is in full swing, paranoia is at an all-time high, and the CIA decides, you know what we need? A way to control people's minds. Because apparently, they thought James Bond villains had the right idea. So, they cook up Project MK-Ultra, a top-secret program that would make conspiracy theorists squeal with delight. The goal? To develop mind control techniques for use against the Soviets. Their methods? Let's just say they weren't exactly following the scientific method here. The CIA's shopping list for this experiment was something else. LSD, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, verbal and sexual abuse, and various forms of torture. It's like they threw darts at a board of bad ideas and decided to try them all. They dosed unsuspecting citizens with LSD in social situations just to see what would happen. Imagine thinking you're going out for a nice cup of coffee and suddenly you're seeing purple elephants dancing. They also tried to create sleeper agents, like real-life Manchurian candidates. The idea was to erase a person's memory, create a new identity, and have them carry out missions without even knowing it. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. Turns out, the human mind is a bit more complex than expected. The experiments were carried out in universities, hospitals, and prisons across the United States and Canada, because nothing says land of the free quite like secretly drugging your own citizens. When the project was finally exposed in the 1970s, the CIA director at the time, Richard Helms, ordered all MK-Ultra files to the Unit 731 atrocities. While the rest of the world is gearing up for war, Japan decides to get a head start on the worst war crimes competition by setting up Unit 731. Their mission? To develop biological and chemical weapons through human experimentation. Because apparently the Geneva Convention was more of a suggestion to these guys, led by the charming microbiologist Shiro Ishii, and by charming I mean utterly psychopathic. Unit 731 was like the evil twin of a normal research facility. Instead of lab rats, they used humans. Their subjects, called logs, were primarily Chinese civilians and prisoners of war. Talk about taking the phrase treated like cattle to a whole new level. They deliberately infected people with diseases like plague, cholera, and anthrax, just to watch what happened. They performed vivisections, that's live dissections for those of you who skip biology class, without anesthesia. They tested frostbite treatments by leaving people outside in the freezing Manchurian winter until their limbs froze solid. They also conducted weapons tests on live subjects, studied the effects of burning and drowning, and even did forced pregnancies to study the transmission of diseases from mother to child. It's like they had a checklist of most horrific things imaginable and were determined to tick off every box. When the war ended, many of the unit's researchers were granted immunity by the US in exchange for their data. That's right, they literally got away with murder because their research was deemed valuable. Talk about a deal with the devil. The Thethalidomide Trials. The Thethalidomide Trials were a pharmaceutical disaster that proves sometimes the cure is worse than the disease. Enter Chemie Grunenthal, a German pharmaceutical company, with their miracle drug, thalidomide. It was supposed to be the Superman of morning sickness remedies. Safe, effective, and non-addictive. Spoiler alert, it was about as safe as using a flamethrower to light birthday candles. Thalidomide hit the market faster than you can say inadequate testing. It was sold over the counter in Germany and prescribed in 46 countries. Pregnant women everywhere rejoiced, thinking their days of hugging the toilet bowl were over. Little did they know they were part of an unintentional global-scale experiment. Here's where things go from bad to worse. Turns out, thalidomide had a nasty little side effect. It caused severe birth defects. We're talking missing limbs, malformed organs, and in many cases, death. The kicker was that the drug company knew about the side effects but kept it under wraps. They were sitting on a ticking time bomb of lawsuits and public outrage, and their strategy was basically, maybe if we ignore it, it'll go away. By the time thalidomide was pulled from the market in 1961, thousands of babies had been born with severe deformities. The drug company's response? A half-hearted, oops, our bad, followed by years of legal battles. The silver lining, if you can call it that, is that the thalidomide disaster led to a complete overhaul of drug testing and approval processes worldwide. The human radiation experiments. Picture this. It's the 1940s and 50s. The Cold War is heating up, atomic fever is spreading faster than a celebrity rumor, and the US government decides, you know what would be fun? Let's see what happens when we expose unsuspecting citizens to radiation. These experiments were more varied than a box of assorted chocolates, except instead of caramel and nougat, you got plutonium and radioactive iodine. They injected pregnant women with radioactive iron to see how quickly the fetus would absorb it. They fed radioactive oatmeal to disabled children because apparently regular oatmeal wasn't exciting enough. They even injected some people with plutonium just to see what would happen. Turns out, nothing good. Who knew? One of the most infamous cases involved a house in Houston that was secretly built with radioactive materials. The residents were studied for years without their knowledge. Most of these people had no idea they were part of an experiment. They thought they were getting routine medical care or participating in harmless studies. When these experiments finally came to light in the 1990s, it was like watching a nuclear meltdown in slow motion. The government's response was basically, oops, our bad, followed by a lot of hand-wringing and document shredding. The fallout, pun absolutely intended, led to major reforms in how human subjects are protected in scientific research. It's like the scientific community collectively realized that maybe, just maybe, secretly irradiating people wasn't the best way to advance knowledge. The Nazi experiments during Woody II. The Nazi experiments were primarily conducted by SS doctors in various concentration camps across Nazi-occupied Europe. These doctors, a term used loosely here, operated with complete disregard for human life and dignity. Their victims were primarily Jewish prisoners, as well as Roma, Sinti, disabled individuals, and other groups deemed undesirable by the Nazi regime. One of the most notorious sets of experiments involved hypothermia research. Prisoners were forcibly submerged in tanks of ice-cold water or left naked in freezing conditions for hours. The supposed goal was to find ways to help German pilots survive if they were shot down over cold waters. In reality, it was torture that often resulted in death. High-altitude experiments were another area of focus. Victims were placed in low-pressure chambers to simulate conditions at extreme altitudes. Perhaps the most infamous Nazi doctor was Josef Mengele, known as the Angel of Death at Auschwitz. Mengele had a particular interest in genetic experiments, especially involving twins. He He would perform cruel and often lethal tests on twin children, attempting to unlock the secrets of genetics and heredity to support Nazi racial theories. After the war, some of the doctors responsible for these atrocities were put on trial at Nuremberg. These trials led to the creation of the Nuremberg Code, a set of ethical principles for human experimentation. This code forms the basis for many of our current research ethics guidelines. The Operation Midnight Climax. Operation Midnight Climax was a subproject of the infamous MK-Ultra mind control program. The basic idea was to lure men to CIA-run brothels, dose them with LSD without their knowledge, and then watch what happened through one-way mirrors. The CIA hired sex workers to slip the drugs into their clients' drinks. These midnight climax sessions were observed by CIA agents who were probably questioning their life choices as they sat behind the mirrors, clipboards in hand, watching drug-addled civilians trip balls. But wait. It gets better. The operation wasn't just limited to brothels. They also tested LSD and other drugs in bars, restaurants, and beaches, because nothing says covert operation quite like randomly dosing people in public places. The man behind this psychedelic circus was George White, a federal narcotics agent who apparently thought, why stop the drug trade when you can join it? The goal of all this madness, supposedly to study mind control techniques and gather information on behavior modification. In reality, it was more like a frat party gone horribly wrong, but with government funding. When the operation was finally shut down in 1965, White wrote to his CIA supervisor, "I was a very minor missionary, actually a heretic, but I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun, fun, fun. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, cheat, steal, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest?" Truly, a model public servant. The legacy of Operation Midnight Climax? Well, besides providing endless material for conspiracy theorists and Hollywood scriptwriters, it led to stricter oversight of CIA operations. It also probably made a lot of people very wary of accepting drinks from strangers.
Thank you for watching.